Hope you're enjoying your visit here this evening. Now, on with the show.
Hello. Once again, this is Paul Stefan, and this is another edition of TV Free Baltimore Film Reviews. And today, our guest is the director of the recursion theorem, which is what we're mostly going to be talking about, because if you're watching this the way we want to show it, you've just seen the film. And that's Ben Sledge. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks so much for having me on.
It'd be terrific to have you. Now, what is your background? What led you up to this point of getting into film?
Well, I've always been interested in storytelling. So I think storytelling is, what I'm passionate about and what I want to pursue and what I enjoy connecting with audiences over. So I've done that in different ways, but for a long time, I've been doing that in film in an independent director role. So one of the first films I did was a fun little mockumentary about a guy who wants to be a ninja, and then kept going in that way. I really like the drama comedy genre, or some people call it a dramedy. Right. So really a lot of my background came from that, which is a lot different than recursion theorem that people may have just seen. Right. So, but yeah, I was that kid growing up that was always borrowing their parents' camcorder and making little home, movies and creating stories, and it's just been a passion from long ago. And I definitely grew up in a great time period of filmmaking with directors like Spielberg coming on the scene, and so there's a lot, that just visually I had to admire and look up to, and storytellers that I really appreciated and have always enjoyed sort of following in that footstep.
Well, I know. I mean, some people are people who just kind of learned it on their own. Yes. Some people went to film school. Some people got other kind of degrees that are related to. Do you have any formal education or training in film?
I didn't specifically go to school for filmmaking. I went to school and studied photography, and I studied media and all these different fields that sort of surround filmmaking. So I always, dug into that sort of in the background, and that thus like the very independent role. So, in my full-time career pursuits, I've always been in the media side. So I do a lot of video production and work with media, different forms of media and audio. But filmmaking in itself and storytelling in general has always been something that's been in the background that I've always been trying to, get more in the foreground of my life.
And the first real entree into film was Behind the Mask.
Yeah, Beneath the Mask.
Or Beneath the Mask,
Beneath the
I'm
Mask,
sorry.
yeah. And, that was, after I'd finished school, and I had some friends that were interested in making a little skit and telling a story, and I came back to them and said, no, let's make it a movie. And so, that started the process. That was the first big movie that I did, and that was a feature-length, film, and it was just, there's a lot of bad production values in it, but we had a really good story, and even when I go back and watch it now, I sort of grimace through some of the production flaws, but honestly, it was a really good way to learn. I don't think there's any better teacher than just doing and making mistakes and jumping in. Maybe, in hindsight, not doing that in a feature would have been a smarter approach. But still, the story is what holds up. And so right. I'm still happy to share that film with people today, even despite its flaws, because I still think it tells a really good story, and it has a character that people relate to and experiences, life experiences that people relate to.
Well, you talk about the story and how important that is to you.
Yes.
Aren't you often the screenwriter for your stories or films?
Yeah, I do. I'm not against working with other people's ideas and other people's scripts, but as an independent director, it's often fitting that I'm put in a place where I have to write the stories that I want to tell, and I actually really enjoy that process, and I really like collaborating with others. So oftentimes I will be getting other people's input and other people's ideas on story, and but I think as a director who really appreciates story and really likes story, if you're telling a story that comes from yourself, you definitely you're the best person to bring that to the screen and sort of realize that vision. So to me, that's always a fascinating experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good, because there are filmmakers who are more visual.
Yes.
And they will tell a story with pictures more
Yes.
than they will with words. But with you, it starts with the words. And to me, I would maybe agree with you to say I can make it analogous to baseball, to say the best thing about baseball, if you don't have good pitching, you don't have a good team.
Yes.
In this case, if you don't have those bones, if you don't have that script,
Yeah.
then you've got a lot of tap dancing you have to do with other things, with lighting and photography and the actors and what they bring to it, and
Yeah.
effects and whatever. To say that, but if you've got that solid story, it sounds like you're at least halfway home.
Yeah, and that's what, in the recursion theorem, one thing we keep coming back to is, making sure it's about the story. And, everything has to serve that story, or otherwise you're just, like you said, you're getting into something that's just showing off some lighting or showing off some camera techniques. But if it's not serving the story, it's just sort of superfluous. And
Yeah.
it's very important to me, I guess as someone who cares about narrative and has, a message I want to communicate, that it all comes back to story. And I think there's plenty of room for films that are just entertainment or just, visual pieces of storytelling like you were mentioning. But, different people have different wants and desires. And for me, I'm interested in telling a story to someone and connecting to someone over that story.
Well, that's good. I mean, I always tell people, they ask me what kind of movie I like, and I always say I like those films that are character-driven.
Okay, yeah.
Whether it's about one character or two characters who interact in a certain way. But what I like to also call a small story. It's not explosions. It's not the summer blockbuster. It's not a slapstick film. And it's apparently the Europeans always seem to still do that better than we do. But or they get theirs made. Let's put it that way. But those kind of things, because they're, like you say, you can connect because they're about real people. It's not like Wonder Woman or Captain America is going to be your next door neighbor. I mean, what happens to real people?
Yeah.
And so that's how I see that. Now, with this, where did you get the idea for the recursion theorem?
Well, it has a few different sources of inspiration, but in terms of the story itself, it really comes from the myth of Sisyphus. So going back quite a ways.
Well, yes, it's mythical.
Yeah. So if you're not aware, for those of you out there, Sisyphus in sort of Greek mythology is cursed in the underworld with this task of pushing the large boulder up this hill. And when he's almost finished his task, it rolls back down and he has to start all over again. So he's sort of, cursed in a sense with doing this task repeatedly. But there was actually, this essay on Sisyphus by Camus, the philosopher, who concludes at the end. He had a really challenging statement where he says, you have to consider Sisyphus happy because he has purpose. He has meaning. He has a task that he's meant to do. And I found that, really challenging because it seems to any of us like he has this meaningless effort to just repeat over and over again. But as I started thinking about it more, I started to realize, really this applies to all of us. It's in life we have struggle. And the more I thought about it, I thought, struggle is really necessary. And struggle is what drives us to change and to get better. And it's only through our struggles that we grow. And so looking at, Sisyphus in that light, I saw, he has a task, like we all have a task. We all have a task of moving through this life and facing our challenges and growing. And it's not so much, I think the big takeaway for me was it's not about whether you complete your goals or not. It's the fact that we're all here and that we establish goals and that we strive toward them and something pushes back and we struggle and we keep going. Because otherwise you either complete your goal and you move on to another goal or you don't get to complete it. But to me that's not what defines us or defines our success. It's that we're here, we have challenges, we persevere, we struggle against them, and because of that we grow.
Was that, you mentioned, that sounded like a main theme, but were there other, you said maybe other inspirations for the...
Oh yeah, there was definitely just creative inspirations.
Creative. Okay.
One of them was an old video game called Asteroids. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
yes.
Going back in the ways, early
My
Atari
era.
days. And if you've just watched the movie, you know that there's this whole play with the screen, and so that's very much comes from the Asteroids video game, and there's obviously some filmmaking influences from Hitchcock and Kubrick, and going back to sort of some Wells, a classic noir and black and white film era, which I didn't grow up in that era, but I grew up watching a lot of reruns from that era, so I always have appreciated those filmmakers, and I feel like we don't see a lot of that anymore. We don't see that kind of filmmaking anymore. We see a lot of the Wonder Woman, we see a lot of these movies that are great and entertaining, but they're very much just popcorn entertainment. So I really enjoy going back to those films where you have more defined characters, more defined struggles, and they're just beautiful to look at.
You bring up Hitchcock, but also it's been online, whether you said it or people have compared it to an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Yes.
It has that feel to it.
It definitely has a Twilight Zone, and I was a big fan of watching Twilight Zone, again, reruns growing up.
Right,
but
of course.
yeah, I really appreciate that the Twilight Zone has, it can be challenging at times. Now, there's episodes that are, they did a lot of episodes, so the quality ranges, from here to there, but they really had an intent in a lot of episodes to tell story, yes, but also to deliver a message or to have a social commentary and to allow you to leave the episode and think, well, what did that mean? How does that apply to me? And I always enjoy storytelling that doesn't wrap everything up nicely, and I think Twilight Zone is very good at that. So, it would ask you to participate in it, and I hope Recursion Theorem does that a little bit. I try very much in this film not to explain everything to the audience. I want the audience to sort of have to interpret and to think about it, and I really enjoy talking to people about the movie and what it means to them, and I think if you can do that, if you can leave the audience where they're participating in it, and not just closing all the loops for them, you get much better interaction. You get different ideals from them.
Well, as I, have felt, and I talked to another filmmaker I've had in here, I don't know who it was, but I said that today it seems like it does go for like the obvious, the cheap, a lot of blood in the film, that kind of thing. And I think that's what I told the filmmaker. I said, well, you ever thought of doing something a little more like suspense or a suspense film, something that was more intellectual, had people think?
Yeah.
Or where you had to I told them at the time, I said, Twilight Zone got into my head because you'd watch it and afterwards you might be frightened, but it was all up here.
Yeah.
It wasn't what they didn't obviously throw the bodies and the gore and the monsters in your face. It was just something that was there in your mind. It seems like everything, and that's one of the things we're against, and what we're doing here with TV Free Baltimore is trying to elevate what you see on YouTube, is that there is an audience out there for something a little more intelligent. There's an audience out there for something a little more where you put some thought into it, or like you say, participate in without being, POV participating.
Yeah.
And, and so that's, I think that's important because I watch a lot of TCM, by the way. And and the guy who's the cool top host now, Ben Mankiewicz, he made a comment, and he said, I used to be wondering why all these young people watch these old films. And he says, I don't anymore.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we're saying. We know there is an audience out there that's hungry for that sort of thing, and they're not getting it.
You're right.
And what we're going to be trying to do with our entertainment and our news and everything, shows, crime, whatever, is going to be different. And I think people like you, filmmakers like you also have that ability to do that. I want to see the little comedy film because, wow, this guy does comedy, suspense, Hollywood hire this guy, but or something. But anyway, okay, the other thing to say is explain the title, because a lot of people say, the recursion theorem.
Yeah. The title comes from a mathematical concept, but really like this idea of recursion is just the sense of an embedded repetition. And again, if you've seen the film, you see that there is this idea of loops and looping. And so when I was working on the script and I was working on the title, I was looking a lot into sort of computer references and how computers loop in, and just different mathematical formulas for these inherent recursiveness in the film. So, the ideal for this film for the recursion is simply that, we know that this person exists in a time and space that is a little bit different than ours. And I sort of leave that open to some interpretation. And I know that drives some people crazy, and then some people really enjoy it. But yeah, that's all that's there behind the title, is just to drive home this idea that he's in a separate space where he doesn't really know what's going on, but we do know there's this pattern of repetition, not only physically but within time itself.
Because in some ways, if you look into it, not looking at things deeply, I looked at 3 different definitions. They were all sort of dealt with mathematics.
Yes.
One was set theory, one had to do with computers. And one interesting thing I got out of one of them, and I think it's kind of confirming whether you did it consciously or not, it says a recursion theorem is a way in some form of mathematics where you have this problem or something insurmountable, and you take it down, you do the small solution first, and they build upon one another to possibly the point where you reach the big solution.
Yeah.
And for those who've seen the film, you could say that's kind of intimated by that scene. This is about putting my own head. You talk about what people think about. Is where he's going up on the ladder.
Right.
And he figures, I have found a way out. but he snags his shirt and he falls down. And at that point, I thought that was the ending, because I was like, for a filmmaker, how do they end it? But then he does come up and he's sitting in the chair, and we get this sense it will start all over again, even though you didn't say that. But I felt like saying, if the guy was smart, then he knows the next time maybe I take my shirt off and I go through. That kind of thing. It's like you've got the idea of the smaller problem because of the struggle or effort you made. Then can I build on that and go further the next time and go further until I escape this hell or whatever it is?
Right.
Because a couple times hell is the word that's actually used
Very much
in your
so,
film.
yes.
To kind of give that impression. Now, putting it all together, to do any kind of film, budgets are difficult. And I think you got a lot of production value for a $20,000 budget.
Yeah.
And that's another reason we will show, I've shown the film and we'll show it so that people can listen to your appeal and contribute. But
thank you.
So what kind of, in a sense, what are the challenges of making a good film on a micro budget?
Oh, there's so many challenges, but I'll tell you a good story is that when we started the film, we were thinking we would shoot on location. So we were scouting places that we could film. We were looking for, early century mansions, and we kept running into this problem where we couldn't afford to shoot at places that were close by because they rent them out for weddings. They have, you're competing with other people, and so the budgets are pretty high. Then the places that we could afford, they would be a couple hours drive out. So that just turned into a logistics nightmare of trying to get the crew out and get them back, and over several weeks of shooting, or at least a couple of weeks of shooting. And I just remember getting really discouraged and looking at all these different sites, and I was go in and take photos. And one night after a scouting trip, I was looking at the photos and just thinking to myself, we really only need 3 walls in the story. It all takes place in one location. The 4th wall is the camera. There's only 3 walls in the set that are ever seen. And so I came into our group one day and I said, guys, I think we can build this set and just, save ourselves a lot of money. And everyone sort of laughed, and that was the end of that conversation until I came back the next week with, having done more research. And at this stage, I'd never built a set before, so so I had to come back with a lot more research, showing some sketches of how we could build the flats and put them together. And slowly, I started turning people around to this idea, and we ended up running a empty studio storage facility and building a set inside and filming it all on set. And that's sort of the creative problem solving you run into when you're on a micro budget. You have to have alternate ways of finding the solutions that you need. It's not always going to go the way you think it's going to originally. And then on the other end of it, a lot of the cost are marketing. So that's always a challenge. And just getting the audience out there, that takes money, and it takes effort, and it takes people. And that again is where you have to really do a lot of it yourself and get in there and try to be your own promoter. And it's not easy, and it's definitely not fun, but it's one of those challenges that come with working with a micro budget.
Now, the thing was, so you're basically telling me on this film you were your own production designer.
Yeah, we had some help, but yeah, when you're at a small indie level, nobody gets to wear one hat. So like everyone on the team is multitasking, everyone's doing more than one job, and you need people that have that flexibility and can do that.
Well, I did interview here a very interesting guy, Chester Stacy, who was a production designer, and that's his thing, has his own shop and everything. And so I'm amazed then what you guys put together, because it convinced me that you were shooting in the room of a mansion somewhere.
Yeah.
It looked like that. I mean, the paintings, all the furniture and the knickknacks and all that. I mean, that looked like they were there and belonged there.
It was a lot of work, and that's one of the things that I think filmmakers definitely need to know. If at this level of production, you're getting in there and sanding these things yourself to make them look worn, and I'm fine with that because it's my vision and it's something that I want to create. So I'm willing to do whatever it takes to achieve that. But those details are very important because that room is very much a character, and like I said, it all comes back to story. So we weren't going to move ahead unless the set was the character that we wanted and was telling the story that we wanted, and all those little small things are very important.
And that was great. And I talked to him about when he was here about. I said to him, I said, I think the set tells the story.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, if you have a character, even before maybe, of course you see him right away. What I'm saying, if you sometimes show a room before the character comes in,
Yeah.
it tells you a lot about your character. It's sort of like an establishing shot.
Yes.
In that it's just, oh, look at the books he reads, or look, he's got a drink here, or his room's sloppy, or his room's neat, or, you can, show objects, oh, here's the book he's reading. And so, right, you get a feel for your character.
Very much.
And so it's real important.
Yeah.
And he challenged me a little. He says, no, I create the vision of the director and,
Yeah.
with my stuff. But since you were both.
Yeah, since I was both. I had
You
to do both.
had that.
Well, and it was important to me that when, we have that opening shot, that we see the room and we see Dan in the same light, and that is that they both are worn out. And that, you talk about that layered shell of how many times has he been in this. And I wanted that seed to be planted from early on, that both that room and Dan have been, at this for some time. So I think, having that weariness and that fatigue had to be there for both characters.
Well, there you go. Plus, also, you didn't say this on camera, so we'll get to say now, why Dan Franco?
Dan does an amazing job in the recursion theorem. I was so happy to have him be part of our project, and he's become a great friend since. And he came in and did an audition, and we had a few people come in, and it was clear right away that Dan was the right person for the job, because he had this ability to portray two different personalities very distinctly and very clearly, which was very important to me. He had this everyman, everyday look, and he was the right age for the project, and there's a lot of emotional range required in the story, and he was able to pull it off. And we had to get there on set. It was a collaboration. I'm very much a collaborative person, and I really enjoy getting input and ideas. And working with Dan was very rewarding in that regard. And really, I think I grew as a director working with him, and I think he grew as an actor. And for me, that's the number one thing that I hope comes away from in terms of the team part of a project. I hope everybody comes away having grown a little bit and having gotten to stretch themselves a little bit. And I think there needs to be that inherent self-reward in these type of projects. We all need to grow and achieve. And Dan, I think, really grew a lot in this process, and he had to trust me, and I had to learn to trust him. And through that collaboration, that process, I think we were able to pull something off that neither one of us could have predicted when we first went in that it would have worked as well as it did. But we had enough of a hint there to feel like this is the right person, this is going to work, and we're going to challenge one another. And he was open to that, and that's the number one thing. The actor has to be open to that challenge and to that feedback and input. And the director, I think, needs to be as well. Or I think it works better when they are. Not all directors are, but I think it works best for me if if I give Dan the freedom to say, I have these concerns, or I feel this way, and then I might agree, or we might, I might disagree, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about it and just come together with a common approach.
Well, that's great. And I thought another thing I wanted to bring up was, what I thought was rather clever camera work. The angles and the shots you use, and sometimes there's that brief thing of where the screen goes red and it goes back to black and white. And also, along with that, I wouldn't necessarily, I guess I can call it special effects, but it might have been done by the camera. The thing where like he, sticks his hand through the window, or first the wall, the kind of thing with the wall, and then the thing with the window, and then how he throws his coat up through the ceiling, and those kind of things. Those are clever shots, and actually the one where you show range, but also the interesting action, and I think that's the camera work too. Well, first of all, it's kind of, he's funny. He's running and he keeps running and he keeps coming back through the room, and then he throws the shoe, and the second time he throws the shoe and he catches it, and he's happy that he could catch it. And
he sort of loses himself for a moment there.
Those are camera tricks.
And I have to give a shout out to Omar Juarez, who was our cinematographer, and then Rick Adelson, who was one of our producers, and he was in charge of a lot of the effect shots. So they both had to listen to my ideas and how I wanted things to happen, and then they helped us get there. And I couldn't do this whole project without a very good team, so I'm very grateful for the contributions of everyone involved.
So, but all that was already in the script, that stuff?
Yeah, that was in the script. The flashes of red were not in the script. That was a decision that I made after looking at it in post, and just deciding that we needed some hints there to drive the audience home of these moments of contact for the character, these moments of emotional contact. And we sort of had a discussion that there's certain elements in the story that as he repeats through them, there's these certain moments that always happen. And then there's other moments when he repeats that are new and different experiences. So we're trying to push that home with some of those flashes of red, that there's a sense of familiarity, there's a sense of profoundness with them, that there's something that's sticking out in Dan's mind that he's remembering from a trip through this journey before.
Uh-huh. Okay. Then another thing where I think you were lucky, which a lot of people aren't when they make a small budget film, is that you actually had somebody who did a score.
Very much so. And another shout out to Christian Hessler, who did the score for us. And he started out going back to Beneath the Mask. He was a really big fan of that film. He found us online, and he actually got in touch. And this is going back to 2005 or so. And he sort of just followed me in the work I was doing and wanted to be involved as a composer. And this project, I finally reconnected. I'm saying, hey, we're doing this film. I think it might be a good match. Do you want to look at it and see if you want to be involved? And yeah, he jumped on it, and he did a great job. We had a lot of doing a score like that was a new experience for me as well. So there was a lot of back and forth and learning how to direct a composer, which is completely different than directing actors. And he did an amazing job, and we have this very unique score that I'm very proud of, and I think really enhances the film. It really drives home the moments of excitement, like you were talking about the shoe, and then the more dramatic moments, and it takes you on this emotional journey with Dan.
I mean, it's subtle, I think. I suppose some film scores, if you think like old Hollywood, if there was something big happening, you'd have that big surge in the orchestra, that kind of thing. But it's always there, and it's a component you do pay attention to, but it's not overwhelming. It's not saying somebody like the composer showing off a little bit. You're not getting that.
Yeah, it doesn't take you out of the story. It doesn't distract you away from it. But it does, there are, even in this small film, there are some themes and some cues that circle back around and that you hear again. And so it really, I think, ties it together and bookends it very well.
Okay, and again, I say important thing for me, a lot of people in films, and you may mention a little earlier here, about the ending. Did you have thoughts of different endings for it or different ways to end it? Because at one point it looks like, when he falls off the ladder, you can get it's over because he's dead or something. Yeah. And I said to myself, please don't let him wake up and this has been a dream. That whole cliche, he had a bad nightmare and then he gets up and goes to work at night. See when I get home, honey, kind of thing. Yeah. But then he gets up and then it's a split second and then there he is in the chair again.
Yes.
And was that from the beginning? Or something?
That was always the end from the beginning. We did have some discussions on when the camera zooms out at the very end, that perhaps it keeps going and you see like several Dans in several rooms at the same time. But I didn't like, one, that was going to be challenging for us to pull off from an effects point of view. But two, I wanted to keep it smaller and focused on the one character, and then you sort of extrapolate that he's been through this a lot of times. But it's a little bit different feeling if you see like hundreds of Dans in hundreds of rooms, and so I felt like that was an idea we explored, but the way that it ends now is the way it was originally written, and ultimately what I thought worked best for the film.
Because that decision, I thought, worked well. What you're talking about, multiple rooms, multiple Dans, then I think you'd be changing the focus. Instead of saying Sisyphus, you'd be getting into Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
Maybe, here's his different rings of hell that he's in.
Yeah, exactly. A little bit different a message. So in the end, I think just keeping it on the single character and letting him iterate through it.
Right. In a way, like summing it up to me is to say that this is a movie that really, even though it's 20-some minutes long, that people have to pay attention to. They have to become part of it and just kind of stop and watch, because you may really miss something. You do have to think, and maybe even think along with the character.
Yes.
And if you want an easy, cute ending, you're not going to get it.
No, you're not.
It's like, is this endless? Is he in this endless hell? Or is he going to do, like I said, with the recursion theorem, he'll eventually figure his way to get out of that room?
Yeah. And I love hearing these theories and these different ideas. And yeah, I'm like I said, I'm a big fan of films that don't wrap it up for you neatly. And to me, if you leave a film experience and you're still thinking about it the next day or the day after that, then that is success. Because that's not going to happen if you're going to just see something that's pure entertainment and it gives you all the answers. That still has value and that's still an experience.
Right.
But it's not going to stick with you. And what I love with hearing people's and then also people just want to know. They're like, well, what did go on? And I like that curiosity. And my response is, well, the challenge is I have my ideas, and I can tell you those. But really, what's valuable to me is your thoughts and your ideas on it.
Well, that's great, because I know, and I brought my daughter up this way, we'd go to films, mostly at the Charles, because they were, again, more character-driven and foreign films, to say the whole thing for me, even when I was younger and when high school, college, is the idea to be able to discuss the film after you're eating something after the movie. Yeah. And then, like I said earlier, there's been so many movies, they're so planned out for you. Yeah. There's nothing really to talk about. Oh, I liked it. It was a thrill. It was funny. Okay, now what are we going to talk about? Yeah. As opposed to this, you could keep talking about it. If you had 3 or 4 people with all different ideas about recursion theorem, you'd have a nice, post-movie dinner conversation.
Yeah, very much so.
And that's how I saw it. Well, I want to thank you for that part. But tell us now about your upcoming or ongoing projects.
All right, so we have a short film again. This one is a comedy, it's actually a piece of a feature that I wanted to film. Decided to take out one scene, put a different beginning and end on it, and put it together as a independent film, and use that to, hopefully as a means to have some success with it and maybe get a chance to do the feature film. I'm very aware of not trying to stretch above my means. So with Beneath the Mask, I did a feature, and I felt like I did stretch above my means. As I mentioned, it suffers a little bit because of that. With recursion theorem, I felt like one of the things we were able to do with that was make it small and do everything that we could to the best of our abilities. And I think we were pretty successful with executing what we wanted. And so with this short comedy, it's called Take a Penny, and it's really just about a character who is experiencing a daily frustration, and it just sort of follows him through that. This one, because it's a piece of a longer film, there's not a lot of that significant message that I like to tell in it.
Yeah, right.
But it gives us a chance to do something a little different, something that's funny. So that's actually complete, and we're going to shop that around to some festivals. It's not available to the public right now. We don't have it posted on YouTube, but we will soon. The big project I'm working on right now is actually a game called Gears of Eden. So as we were entering post-production on recursion theorem, I was still wanting to tell stories and connect with people and share. And I wasn't ready to jump into another film project. We still had a lot of room to go on finishing recursion theorem in post-production. So I started this game project, and it tells a story set in the future. It's a sci-fi game, and it involves this world of sentient machines that are in the future in a different star system, and they sort of only remember humans in their myths. And they have their own civilizations, their own ideas, their own beliefs, and what it allows us to do, which is really interesting, is really to critique humanity by critiquing the civilization of these machines, but to do it in a way that's a step removed and a little bit safer. And we're really just exploring, the ideal of civilization and belief, and what it means to be alive. And again, sort of, I wouldn't say it's related to recursion theorem, but recursion theorem was, at its core, exploring some of these same messages that I talked about earlier. What does it mean for us to be alive and in this world, and what are our challenges? And this is sort of that was a singular experience in recursion theorem, and with Gears of Eden, we're looking at more of a macro experience. So what does it mean for civilization, and as our separate cultures and how they work together and integrate and come together, what does that mean, and what do our beliefs mean about us and about the things that we believe in? So there's a lot of big ideas, but that has to distill down into fundamentally what is a fun game to play. Right. And so it's a totally different challenge than filmmaking and a different way of telling a story. But it's a very exciting and very fun experience.
Well, terrific. Now what I want you to do, close up by telling folks in your camera your contact information. If they want to find you or your films or any of your creative adventures, let them know how to do that.
Right, so you can find Recursion Theorem at recursiontheorem.com. You can follow me on Twitter at SledgeWeb. And then for Gears of Eden, you can keep up with Gears of Eden on Twitter as well, at Gears of Eden, or visit gearsofeden.com.
Terrific.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming by, Ben.
It's been a pleasure.
And that's our latest episode of TV Free Baltimore's Movie Reviews. We hope to give you more films and their directors in the coming weeks. Thank you, and good night.
We hope you're enjoying your visit here this evening. Now, on with the show.